I'm Stuart Yasgur, and this is Economic Architecture, the podcast. We've talked about resilience on the podcast mainly as it relates to fortifying homes and communities against wildfire. But other climate-related threats from hurricanes and other extreme weather can create harmful water-related damage to communities. In today's conversation, we're taking a very different approach. We are talking with Paul Robinson, the founder and executive director of RISE, a Norfolk-based nonprofit that is bringing a thoughtful and intentional approach to foster new solutions.
These are real world problems and we're looking for solutions. We're not funding R&D projects. We want to fund a pilot. We want a company to come in and say, we're going to build something, we're going to demonstrate it works. And we fund them typically at about $250,000 or $300,000 to do about 12 to 18 months pilot demonstration using this region as a living lab. So they can put sensors in the stormwater pipes, they can build their expandable walls, they can build their living shorelines, demonstrate them, and that gets them the next leg up to paying customers and investment and that sort of thing.
They've created a living laboratory that advances innovative solutions to the biggest challenges facing coastal communities. It's an open innovation ecosystem that promotes climate resilience and economic growth in Southern Virginia. Today's episode is about how one structural innovation could help coordinate government policies with private sector funding to address the multitude of damage that can come from the impacts of flooding. Paul, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for making this work.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Paul, I'd love to dive right in. I grew up on a coast. You were living on a coast now. I'm envious that you're there, and I'm not. Living on a coast is incredible, but it also comes with risk. For those of us who may not be as familiar, can you help us understand what are some of the risks? Where are you located, and what are some of the risks you face?
Yeah, so we're located in the Hampton Roads region, Southeast Virginia. We're actually located in Norfolk. We're a region of 7 cities and several counties, about 1.7 million people. We're very representative of a coastal community in that we're flat, we're on the coast, but we also are home to some major installations, major naval base, port, hospitals, universities, as well as the infrastructure that's needed to keep those things going, getting goods in and out and people in and out. Some parts of the region are towns that were built 400 years ago when they weren't really thinking about what we're threatened with today. We're very flat, aging infrastructure, and we're really threatened by 2 types of flooding. One is the nuisance type of flooding, which you get when there's a high tide, when the wind's coming from the north or northeast, pushes the water in the Chesapeake Bay down, increases the river levels, pushes the water up through the stormwater system, and you get what's often called sunny day flooding, where you get roadways maybe a mile or 2 inland that are flooding because the water, high tide is coming up through the stormwater system. And in summer, when there are these heavy thunderstorms, highly localized rainfall shafts, then that changes the flooding map considerably. So you can get regions, if you get an inch or an inch and a half an hour, which is not uncommon in a heavy thunderstorm, you can get some very heavy, severe, localized flooding. And that makes getting around from point A to point B difficult and unknown, and it can lead to loss of cars, and it's a major inconvenience. The other threat that we have is from hurricanes and sea level rise. And as these hurricanes come up the East Coast or across the Atlantic, they can be catastrophic. And luckily, we have not been struck by anything very severe in the past 15 years or so. When I say very severe, it's been bad. We've had several category 1s, category 2s, but that they cause significant disruption, damage, and loss of life. So we've got 2 threats, more of a nuisance type threat and more of a threat to life and limb too.
And that means that you're flooding at the nuisance level and also this kind of catastrophic level. It's a every year phenomenon. This is a way of life, is that you have to deal with this in a large geographic area that has infrastructure that's been there for a really long time.
That's right. And we see the tidal flooding can occur any time of year. It's particularly when you start to get northeasters, severe low pressure systems coming up the East Coast. But as we saw this year, just in the past year or so, Hurricane Helene affected inland very badly. Very strong flooding, a lot of damage through Asheville, Southwest Virginia, into the mountains. And also we got a storm in February, Winter Storm Jet, which contains significant flooding as well as cold and wind, which can be a whole different threat. It seems that these threats are becoming more numerous and severe, just anecdotally.
Yeah, anecdotally, and I do think that's backed up by the research. By the numbers show that they're getting more and more frequent, and they're getting more severe each year. And one of the problems is that storms don't discriminate along property lines and who owns the property, who's responsible for it, et cetera. So there is not a single party that is responsible for the entire thing.
No,
How do you start to deal with thinking about creating solutions here?
it's hard. It's what we do at Rise is we try and characterize the problem and then find people who are thinking about these things and have ideas. And you've got to keep in mind the coastal flooding's a little bit different. Like when you see coastal flooding, like in Jamaica, but also in Katrina, it's a large area underwater, which is very damaging, and as we've all seen. But if you go into the mountains in the west, you start to get these flash floods. And that's a little bit different. It's very dangerous. There's nothing you can do once it starts. So, when you have to just get out the way or you're stuck there. So it's a different kind of a threat. Both have got to be taken very seriously. And there are different solutions for the different events.
So can we just talk a little bit about the history of Rice? Because I think it's fascinating the way, as we learned about it, the way that it's set up, the role that it's playing, how it came about is a really fascinating history here.
So we were part of, to go back to Hurricane Sandy was a very damaging storm, came up the East Coast. And I think that was about 2012. And in response to that, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development put money on the table there for states to create resilience protections, resilience infrastructure for their cities, for their towns and their coasts. And it was done on the basis of a competition. And the Commonwealth of Virginia won $120 million to do some work in a part in Hampton Roads on a neighborhood to protect it with berms and walls and pumps and that sort of thing. But part of that award was for a laboratory and accelerator to come up with new ideas, new adaptations, new resilience solutions that might A, solve a problem or address a problem in ways that have not been done before, and B, provide people some jobs and grow small business and provide a catalyst or at least a starting platform for companies to test and demonstrate their products and then go on to bigger and bigger markets as they grow. So what we do is we pose the problems and we put them out there through our team of professionals, our communication professionals. We put the problem out there. These are real world problems and we're looking for solutions. We're not funding R&D projects. We want to fund a pilot. We want the company to come in and say, we're going to build something, we're going to demonstrate it works. And we fund them typically at about $250,000 or $300,000 to do about 12 to 18 months pilot demonstration using this region as a living lab. So they can put sensors in the stormwater pipes, they can build their expandable walls, they can build their living shorelines, demonstrate them. And that gets them the next leg up to paying customers and investment and that sort of thing. And we've run 13 of these challenges. We've funded 45 companies and collectively they've raised over $50 million in follow-on funding, which is really the intent of the whole thing. We started in 2017 and we've received funding from a number of different places, including the federal government and state government and a number of different entities. And we're always focused and concerned on our sustainability. And we'd welcome any calls if anyone has any offers or ideas there. But we're always looking to the future and how we can keep going and who we can partner with. We can't do this alone. And so that's always on our radar. And we talk to other coastal communities. There's like telecons that go on, and everyone's got the same sort of flavor of the same problem. And so it's interesting. There's definitely no lessening in the need.
Yeah, the need is growing, and the innovations that you're helping to catalyze it are going to benefit other communities who have similar kinds of issues, right?
Oh,
So we all
they must. We are not solving just our own problem. They must be scalable.
So we all have a vested interest in seeing these kind of catalytic platforms
Yeah.
succeed.
Ideally, the concept we have is, although we're a big region here, we're still several small towns, which makes it easy to develop and wring out solutions. And we can work with the city governments, and we know these people. So if something's not working quite right, we can get in there and we can fix it. And so we're the start of the conveyor belt. It's a great place to tweak and soften the rough edges. Then you go on to the bigger cities, maybe Washington or Baltimore, up to New York, Philadelphia. It's very hard to start in these places. It's done. They run pilots too, but it's been seen to be a benign place to start and get your product moving.
That is great. What are some of the kinds of challenges that you run? What are some of the topics?
Living shorelines have always been of interest to people in the resilience sector. And part of that required transporting or building oyster reefs, because oysters are very efficient at breaking the energy of waves and protecting the shoreline. And they've got the benefit over gray sort of concrete protections, because the older they get, the better they get, because attract more oysters and they become more of a barrier. The only problem that was seen here is that the places that manufactured the pieces of the oyster reef were nowhere near the coast. One was, in fact, 150 miles from here. So you had to build these concrete blocks and stick them on a truck and get them down here, which is not very efficient or cheap or carbon efficient, if you will. So we funded a company that had developed a way they built a 3D printer. So as they could put it down on the shoreline and actually build the oyster reef on site and put it in the ground. And that made it quicker, cheaper, more economically and environmentally efficient. And they're going gangbusters all around the country. And so that was an early on one that we're really happy with. We're happy with all of them, but that was one that stood out. We funded this company. They're called Natrix, and they're out of Raleigh, Durham. They've done a fair amount of work in our area. They're also working in Louisiana and Texas, I believe. And they do great work. And every time that we've funded them for different projects, they've really come through with some very interesting ideas.
Yeah. As you say, they do this remarkable. It's like printing the shoreline right there. And I think that one of the things that I was fascinated by when learning about it is the old fashioned model. If we're building with this gray infrastructure, we're putting concrete and stones and putting it in place. The day we put it in place, we have to start budgeting for its replacement, because the waves take their toll and the whole thing starts to come apart a little bit. And so, it becomes a depreciating asset on day one that you have to plan to replace. Whereas these nature-based solutions like Matrix's solutions, they actually improve.
That's
So
right.
it's an appreciating asset. The performance actually improves over time. And so if you have a large capital kind of location, whether you're an airport, a kind of community, whatever, where you need a seawall, like, it really changes the economics of planning for these kinds of things over the long term. Yeah, I think it's an underappreciated benefit of what they're doing.
And one other example I'd give you, and I mean, we have a lot of examples and we've only got a limited time here, but these ones are easy to understand quickly. The flooding that I told you about, where we have the high tides and the heavy rainstorms, getting around is like a crapshoot. It's tough. We ran a challenge where we wanted to find ways to bring real-time flooding into Waze, which would then guide drivers around the flooding as it's happening, as it's being updated on your phone. And we found a company out of Brisbane, Australia, Flood Map, and they came in and stood that up in Norfolk. And Norfolk's the first city in the world to use Waze in that way.
Wow. So if you're opening your phone and you go and you open the Waze, you can actually see, okay, what streets are flooded right now, so you can get around. That's fantastic.
And if it'll route you around the flooded areas.
That's fantastic. Is Waze, is that integrated through, is that a third-party add-on, or is that integrated through Waze? And is Waze thinking about doing that in other locations?
I think all of the above. It takes advantage of the Waze Connected Cities program infrastructure, which is great. And usually it's used to just close a road when you're having a street party, but we grabbed it and used it for something else.
That's great.
And it works.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Just one of these interesting aspects, and you did mention it, but one of these interesting aspects also about Rise is that you now have, if you think about it, so you have large government needing to respond to Sandy. You have state playing this large role of conceiving of an entirely new program. And then you have Rise, which is kind of a separate organization that's now enabling for-profit companies. And so this is an example of kind of government, kind of citizen sector and private sector kind of working together to stimulate innovations to address accelerating risks that we're all facing, but also doing it in a way that creates economic viability and all of
Yeah.
those kinds of things.
Yeah. And if we can understand not every solution fits the model of a challenge. There's a few things that have to fall into place, but when you get it right and you meet the needs, we did another one with the Public Works Department locally. They wanted to know what was going on in their stormwater pipes on sunny days as well as when the storm. And a company came in, Storm Sensor. They put sensors in the stormwater system, and they were able to give the Public Works Department real-time information about how much room there is in the stormwater pipes and which ways the water is going. And it's not always a pretty story.
No, sure. I wonder, so how do you determine what your challenges are going to be about? Is this in conversation with others in the region?
We talk to what we find are the people who deal with this stuff really know the effect well. They know what happens when there's flooding. They know what's affected and how much and what's going to happen. They don't necessarily know what the new solution would be. They don't know how to put it into ways or that but there's other people out there who are thinking about these things. And we spend a lot of time talking to the people in operations, the people who face this stuff day in and day out. It's really interesting. It's a great process, and we learn a lot about it. And then we build the challenge around it. And we ask the companies to tell us what their solution is, to tell us why they think it's going to work. We don't want too early stage. We want something that can be put in the ground, full scale, and demonstrated. But also we want them to give us what their business model is, their business plan. We want them to be able to grow this into a business. As I said, these are not R&D projects. These are the beginnings of business. And so where's catalytic funding for them to get them to private investment or paying customers or both?
And so you created an open innovation ecosystem for promoting climate resilience in Southern Virginia. Are others starting to do something similar, or is there replication? Are there people considering doing something similar?
I think there's different flavors out there. I'm reluctant to say that we're way ahead or not way ahead, but I think we do things in a slightly different way. Plus, what we've seen more and more, certainly in the past 2 years, is that solutions have to be regional. They can't be just one point, an intersection in a city or one point in a city. It's the region. And we see that we've done a lot of work out west in the Appalachian and the mountains as well on flooding. These have to be regional solutions. And so that's really what we're focused on now. We want to work with more and more communities and more states. And so we're taking a broader approach and trying to address regions' problems.
We obviously look at innovations all the time and kind of structural innovation and kind of a little bit of a different orientation, but we're talking to innovators all the time who have new ideas that may be science backed and where there really could be a market for it, but it can be so difficult to get approval to move forward with a test, especially if it's something that deals with climate, deals with extreme weather, that might deal with kind of public spaces or transportation spaces or the coastline. How is it that you're able to advance these in your context?
A lot of it really comes down to working with the local communities and the local government entities. Maybe this is city councils and maybe it's the planning district commissions. And you have to talk to them and understand the problems. If they see that something might work and they have an idea of where it could be tested or where it might fit, things are a lot easier. Trying to force a solution into a community is a very hard thing to do, but if it fits the need and people understand, it really helps out. One example we've seen is when we started working in the western part of the state and we started talking about our challenges and that we would come in and try something out for nothing, and it was met with some skepticism. But as we got in there and made sure that the companies that we were funding were focused on the real needs, it changes. It changes. And if you're not quite meeting the need, you either adapt or it's just not going to work. But if you've got the folks in the leadership interested, and if they have confidence that what you're doing can help, then that's really what makes things work.
And so you've built, through that track record, you started to build that trust and buy-in from local communities. I guess that, as you're describing now, I think one of the things that I'm beginning to appreciate is that that's really another sense in which you're looking at this as a living laboratory. So it's like that funding is critical, but you also have to create an environment with enough buy-in so that people can actually put these innovations to test and demonstrate that they create value for people.
And so let me tell you another little anecdote here. This was one of those aha moments. I'll give you one on the coast, and that one is, I mentioned before, when the company Storm Sensor put the sensors in the stormwater pipes, and the Public Works Department suddenly got a good, clear understanding of why they flood very quickly and often, and when the sun's shining, because the pipes are half full, like for usually at just normal days. But out west, another one of these examples was a company that came in and was developing an early warning system for flooding out there, for the flash flooding. And they did some analysis. This company is called Merak, MERAK. And they did some analysis, and they were able to show the people out there, the emergency managers out there, what happens if a certain part of a stream has debris in it from the year before and isn't cleaned out. And so the emergency manager was able to see this analysis, see the maps, and understand, I got to clean out in March. I got to go and clean out these different areas here. Otherwise, everything upstream, when the storms come, are going to get more severely damaged. So they now know the early warning isn't just half an hour or an hour before the storm. It's 3 or 4 months ahead to know where to clean the debris out of the streams, because that's what happens after a flood, is that bits of houses and bridges and whatever else get stuck in the stream, and then the next storm comes along and backs up even more. So it's one of these cases where the spawns other solutions, and that's pretty rewarding.
Yeah, that is fascinating. Yeah, of course, because so anybody who's familiar with those kind of mountainous, so it's like you described, on the coast is flat, but you go west, it starts to get mountainous, and then in those mountains, if you're familiar with how water goes down in those mountainous areas, you get these streams, and it's really interesting to think about. So if you still have some of the debris from the year before, you're creating little mini dams, and you're getting flooding in those local communities that, if you don't clear out, can really exacerbate the problems.
It's very hard to clear streams from debris, very expensive, very time consuming, but those can be jobs. Those can be local jobs. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at too.
That's fascinating. Yeah. And it's an ounce of prevention versus a pound of the cure. Yes, it's expensive to do, but it's much less expensive than experiencing the damage that would come from it if you don't do it. Yeah. Remarkable. It's remarkable. You've made advances in all of these areas. And as a result of that, the communities experience less risk in many of these ways. But what are some of these areas that you're imagining are going to rise to the top for you?
A couple of major areas that we're looking at that we're just finalizing, so I may be a little circumspect here, is that we have seen that cities are threatened not just by climate and flooding and those type of events, but they're also very hungry on the use of their local resources, in particular water. And there's a few cities around the world that are really faced with that problem. There are ways to replenish the aquifers that are being studied and analyzed today. And in fact, there's a major one in our local area. And we want to understand and look for the economic case for doing that, which will then support the credit market to provide a business around and incentivize those sort of applications. What we're also looking at, and we're very interested in, over the years, we've worked with some companies that have home building attributes for entire regions. One of the things, first floor elevation, that's a real important factor in defining whether a house has a significant insurance claim for a given flood level. And we funded a company, True Flood Risk, that can map remotely buildings' first floor elevation across an entire city, and they've done it here. We funded them to develop their product. So for any building, any residential building, single family or multifamily resident, we know what that first floor elevation is. And we also have worked with a company that has flood underwriting for every single property in the US. You put those two things together, there is a way for property owners as well as residents of each one of these properties to know what their resilience threat is and how much it would cost to protect themselves, and what opportunities, what options are available to them that they could afford for any given level of economic status.
That's phenomenal. And there might be a bunch of different stakeholders who would be really interested in that, because it's for any homeowner, you understand what your exposure is, what your expenditure might need to be. For community, you understand it. For companies who want to supply those kinds of goods and services, you can imagine it. For folks who want to do the work that's related to it. For folks who share the risk, the financial markets, that's remarkable.
And again, it's a regional solution. And even though many coastal communities are developing their coastal storm risk management projects, which are big civil engineering projects to protect the cities, there's always someone outside the wall. There's always some properties that can't be protected, and maybe the protections are non-structural, which are adaptations to the building. There's always a need.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And on the aquifer piece, I think it's phenomenal. We've long been, since I think it might be 15 years ago, 12, 15 years ago, and Andy Lipkiss, who was the founder of Tree People and a remarkable social entrepreneur, had this very powerful case that he demonstrated that LA, for example, spent roughly $1 billion a year. These are the numbers at the time, $1 billion a year, bringing water to the city of LA. And it was a huge part of their environmental footprint, all the kind of greenhouse gases is the largest part of their electric bill and energy usage. They spend about $500 million a year removing water from LA to remove flooding and all of those kinds of pieces, and about $125 billion a year removing the natural filtration system that could lead that water back into the aquifer. And smarter usage of the aquifers that were there can be not only environmentally beneficial, but also there's such a possible kind of business case for communities. It's I think that will be if this is an area in which you move ahead, it would be very exciting. We'd love to follow along with you and learn with you.
Yeah, we're always looking for partners. We can't do this alone. Really, we want to partner with other communities all around the country and around the world too.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful. So if somebody is hearing this and they are either a company with an idea who's looking for a living laboratory, or they are a policymaker or a citizen in a community that is experiencing kind of the growing threat of extreme weather, how do they act? How do they start to learn more about the work that you're doing?
They should go to our website, riseresilience.org. There's an info tab on there. Send us a message. We answer all that we can, and watch out for our challenges. And by all means, enter. There's money there, and there's an opportunity to get your idea going. Reach out. We're always willing to hear from people and talk about whether your idea is good and relevant. Maybe it could be better, and maybe it's right on. We'll tell you that too. So that's riseresilience, all one word, .org.
And that's probably also the best place to hear about the organizations you've already funded and worked with, and who have already demonstrated the efficaciousness of their work in your area. That's great.
As well as past examples of our challenges and our challenge documents and that sort of thing. Good job.
Great. Paul, this is fascinating. The work that you're doing, it's remarkable. And such, I think it's an underappreciated example also of the way that kind of government, citizen sector, and private sector can work together to spur innovations that really can meaningfully address some of the larger challenges that we're experiencing in our communities. You're concretely advancing real solutions, but also serving as an example of what we can do elsewhere as well.
Oh, thank you, Stuart. I appreciate that.
It's great speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
One of the things we try to do is we start with the Hippocratic Oath. First of all, let's do no harm. Then let's try and do our best. For example, when you look at the work that RISE is doing, Sandy occurred. The government saw the impact that Sandy wrought on the Northeast and the whole kind of Eastern seaboard. They did something really constructive. They said, we don't yet have the answers, but we need the ability to find answers in a way that we don't currently have. So they put together big chunks of money to actually enable those who are willing to stand up to solve those problems. That's at the federal level. That was complemented then by activity at the state level, where they said, okay, we recognize that we don't really have a department at the state level that is like the innovation department at the state level. What we need to do is make sure that we create this capacity. And we're going to do it by making sure that this nonprofit gets set up. So now we have federal government, we have state government, we have a nonprofit, and that this nonprofit is going to be able to help us invite in the innovations that we need to address this problem. When we look at what is really working, we're really interested in a handful of things, including, first, what problem do you think is really important? What problem do you think is actually really worth solving? We don't go in kind of presuming that we know what that is at the outset. We need to listen and learn from that. Then we say, okay, like, what do you think is the most promising approach to actually solving that problem? And then what are the barriers that are standing in your way of doing that? And what changes can we help bring about that help overcome those barriers? That is a far more productive method to actually finding how we can create massive change. That nonprofit made a smart decision as well. What they recognize is like, look, these problems are so large, we're not going to only be able to use nonprofit approaches to addressing these problems. So actually what we need is businesses, like really viable businesses, to be started to advance the type of solutions that could be really effective here. So now we have the federal government, we have state governments, we have a nonprofit. That nonprofit has come up with a whole methodology for taking very efficient, small amounts of money to kind of lift up the biggest problems that are faced in the region, invite those who might have solutions to those problems to come and address them in ways that are market-based and scalable so that they can go ahead and potentially, if they're successful, grow to the magnitude of the problem. They're also, as a byproduct, creating economic growth in the region. So one of the things that we see at Rise, also started working with the local communities and their public officials to create an environment that is open to and bought into the prospect of working with companies to see if they in fact could be successful. If you trace that story, you got the federal government, you got state governments, you got a nonprofit, you got for-profit businesses, you got local communities. All of these are being put together in a way that's concretely advancing real solutions. And they've done now 13 different challenges. 45 companies have been funded throughout this thing. Those companies have gone ahead and raised $50 million of follow-on funding. And they're now able to go from things that are affecting absolutely the coastal communities, but also the other places in Virginia that are directly affected by this kind of extreme weather, including the mountain regions that are not right on the coast, but have water issues like through rivers and down. It was a remarkable counterexample to those who are kind of pessimistically just pointing out at problems of how this whole different range of actors can come together with intentionality to accelerate the pace of innovation that directly makes our communities more resilient to climate. I think, unfortunately, it's a little bit easy for people to offer critiques of efforts that didn't work as well as they could have, or may not have succeeded at all. While it might be a kind of comfortable pastime, identifying what didn't work is not a reliable path to finding out what will work. Problems can be infinitely described. There is no end to that pathway. There's never a point where you've reached a sufficient description of a problem that you now have the recipe to understand how you need to address that problem. It's a different question you're asking. So one of the things that we see at Rise very much kind of fits with our deep kind of epistemic beliefs at economic architecture, that there is a reliable way to actually start to understand how you can address problems at large scale and the roots of those problems. First, it starts with, we need to understand which problems are really important to solve. And on that question, people who are in communities that are proximate to the problem really are authoritative in a way that needs to be listened to. So if you talk to somebody in a community and you're hearing from people over and over again in a community that this is the most important problem I'm seeing in my community and this is how it manifests itself, that needs to be taken really seriously. And we need to go further. We need to understand what the nature of that problem is. They're telling us the problem's important. They're telling us also that they believe the problem can be solved. And they're telling us where they think that the solution to that problem may lie. You go one step further is to understand what is the biggest barriers in their view to addressing that problem. When that starts to come into focus, you can now start to ask, okay, is there a structural way? Is there a way to address this problem at the structural level that could really address this problem? We see aspects of that in Rise's work. Because in Rise's work, it was very clear, instead of looking at like, hey, here are the 1,000 projects that didn't work, let's identify what is really working. And when you have each of those elements, if you give yourself permission, you can start to move forward with a whole range of solutions that otherwise wouldn't have been conceivable. I'm Stuart Yasgur. This is Economic Architecture, the podcast. Stay tuned for future episodes of the Economic Architecture podcast.